those who sit in darkness. I go to Isaiah 42, verse 3 and verse 7. Let us, in this week, we take a look at this servant that Isaiah talks about. We'll get to know who he is and what he does to accomplish. In so doing, we have got 5 main key points upon which we will study to find out who is this particular servant that Isaiah is talking about. The first key point, we read about the servant nation. Which is this that is called the servant nation? Part 2, the other key point that we'll study to get to know who is this servant is a named individual servant. Another key point, that's the third one, is Persian Messiah. We get to know who is this Persian Messiah, what contributions he made. And part 4 is hope in advance. Hope for us all and for the Israelites. Then finally, we have a feeling and a suffering servant. I may take part 1, the first point, and then I'll give my panelists a chance also to contribute on these particular key point areas upon which we are going to start about who is this particular servant that Isaiah talks about here. So in the first part, we read Isaiah chapter 41, verse 8. Very quickly, God speaks to Israel, my servant. 42, verse 1, as we have seen in our key verse, introduces my servant. Who is this servant? We want to get to know who is this particular servant that Isaiah talks about. Is it Israel? So Jacob, the ancestor of the Israelites? Is it the nation of Israel? Is this the Messiah, Christ, identified in the New Testament as Jesus? So there are 2 kinds of references to servants of God given through Isaiah 41 to chapter 53. One servant is named Israel or Jacob, as in Isaiah 41, verse 8. That's one servant. We'll get to know in Isaiah 41, verse 8, there is one servant named Israel or Jacob. Isaiah 44, verse 1, and verse 2, and verse 21, Isaiah 45, verse 4, and Isaiah 48, verse 20. I think you read all those verses. There is a servant named Israel or Jacob. Because God addresses Israel, Jacob in present, it is clear he, Jacob, represents the nation described from him. Mark you, we are looking at this servant nation. We want to get to know which is this servant nation that Isaiah brings forth. In other instances, such as Isaiah 42, verse 1, and Isaiah 50, verse 10, Isaiah 52, verse 13, and Isaiah 53, verse 11, God's servant is not named. When he is first mentioned in Isaiah 42, verse 1, our key verse, his identity is not immediately apparent. However, as Isaiah develops his profile in later passages, it becomes clear that he is an individual who restores the tribes of Jacob, that is Israel, to God, and dies sacrificially on behalf of sinners. Therefore, it cannot be the same as the nation. So it is clear that Isaiah speaks of 2 servants of God. One is corporate, that is the nation, the children of Israel, and the other is the individual. And this individual is to bring the nation of Israel, the tribes of Jacob, to God. So these are the 2 servants who are depicted now here. What is the role of this servant nation? I think you read Isaiah 41, verse 8 to 20. God assures Israel that the nation is still the servant of the Lord. I have chosen you and not cast you off. The God gives to Israel one of the most significant promises in the Bible. Do not fear, for I'm with you. Do not be afraid, for I'm your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my victorious right hand. Here and in the following verses are one of the best roles of Israel is one of the best roles of Israel is to trust through God to save them, as King Ahaz did not. They had a king called Ahaz, who during their time did not offer any help to them. But they have God, who is our Father, ready, despite the shortcomings, that is ready to rescue us, to redeem us. Rather than to trust in other gods and their images as other nations do. So Israel, we are to trust fully to God, but not depend on the other gods of the other nations. We need to trust our God because He's the only Redeemer. He's the only one who can save us. We have seen two servants in this particular page. As we go ahead to find out about this servant, the characteristics, I want to invite Keva to continue with key number point 2 as we go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Kefa. I'm going to take you through Monday. The title is Unnamed Individual Servant. We are going to read from the book of Isaiah 42, verse 1 to 7. Can I have someone read that verse so that you can get the characters of this unnamed individual servant, please?
Because of time, maybe we can read verse 7 of it.
Yeah, thank you.
Isaiah chapter 42, verse 7 says, to
Thank you. Well, the question we are being asked here is, what is the role and character of God's unnamed servant, whom God chooses and whom He puts His Spirit? Well, we have a number of characters here we should choose from, and if you've read that verse, from verse 7, we'll see that one character is that he gives light or hope by healing blindness and liberating prisoners. Then we also find out that he serves as a covenant between God and the people, this servant that is unnamed. And we continue. How does the role and character of this servant compare with that of the shoot and stump of Jesse, on whom the Spirit of the Lord also rests? That is, we find in Isaiah chapter 11. As in Isaiah 42, the Davidic ruler of Isaiah 11 acts in harmony with God, providing justice and deliverance for the oppressed, as well as wisdom and knowledge of God. We found that this shoot and root of Jesse is the Messiah, the divine child of Isaiah chapter 9, 6, and 7, who also brings peace for the throne of David and his kingdom, with justice and with righteousness. So in Isaiah 42, we find that obviously the named servant is the Messiah. Another question is, how does the New Testament identify the servant of Isaiah 42, 1 to 7, who provides justice? Matthew 12 quotes from Isaiah 42 and applies it to the quiet healing ministry of